state of California's progressive stance on issues from climate change to immigration has long come to epitomize liberal opposition to President Donald Trump. But what does this bitter ideological battle reveal about the choices facing Americans in the coming presidential election? In the second of two special reports, Bob Abeshouse has been finding out.
As wildfires raged across California late last year, scorching more than 100,000 acres and driving tens of thousands from their homes, U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out at the state's leadership and threatened to cut off federal aid.
You got fires eating away at California every year because management is so bad. The governor doesn't know. He's like a child. He doesn't know what he's doing.
That governor, Gavin Newsom, was the first in America to issue a stay-at-home order to combat COVID-19, saving many lives.
This is a moment we need to make tough decisions. This is a moment where we need some straight talk, and we need to tell people the truth.
There's no love lost between President Trump and California Democrats. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is from San Francisco, and Democrats dominate politics in the state, which lean left. Trump, who has no chance of winning there in the 2020 election, rails against California to promote his agenda and fire up his base.
Nearly half of all the homeless people living in the streets in America live in California. It's a shame. It's a disgrace to our country.
There are 1.6 million fewer Californians today living in poverty than there were in 2011. But as a state, we must do everything we can to ensure that no Californian is homeless.
In February, Newsom made homelessness the state government's top priority. In many ways, California offers a vision of government action to promote the common good that is the antithesis of Trump's project to shrink the administrative state.
Because of Trump's philosophy, he is inevitably drawn into conflict with California.
Jerry Brown served as the Democratic governor of California from 2011 to 2019 and from 1975 to 1983. What do you think of President Trump's rhetorical and policy attacks on California?
I think he just sees it as a way to tee off on liberals, on this California society that can stand as a metaphor, an image for his base voter. But no one can deny that California is the fifth largest economy. It has tremendous innovation. It's a food producer like no other state. So we're doing a lot. We've achieved a lot, and that's why people want to come here.
California is a leader in terms of climate change, in terms of building a green economy, in terms of immigration. Do you think that the state is helping to set the issue agenda for the 2020 presidential election?
I don't know that California is setting the agenda. What you said is true. California is doing all these things, as other states. But I will say, when it comes to the green economy and climate change, California is in the front. And given our tremendous economic dynamism, California does refute the Trumpian claim that reducing carbon emissions hurts the economy.
Our continuing investigation of the clash between President Trump and California begins with climate change and its implications for the 2020 presidential election.
This is the newest portion of the fire.
Earlier this year, before the pandemic hit, we went to northern Los Angeles. Last October, the Saddle Ridge wildfire burned close to 9,000 acres here. 100,000 people had to be evacuated, and more than 100 buildings were damaged or destroyed. So the fire came right up here from the valley, is that right?
Yes, it's going about 70 miles an hour with the wind. So it's the fastest fire I've ever seen.
Errol Novikis and his 91-year-old mother lost their home and virtually all their possessions in the fire, which was fanned by strong winds that blow off the mountains in the fall. How much time did you have to get out of your home?
About 10 minutes. I started watering down this side of the house until it got so smoky I couldn't breathe. You know, my mom went upstairs to change out of her pajamas, and by then the firemen came in, grabbed her, threw her in the car, and they told me to get out.
President Trump says the cause of these fires is mismanagement of the forests.
There's no forest around here. It's all tundra. And if there's no rains, it's going to dry out, and you're going to have 4 feet of just crispy, dry plants ready to burn. And for about 15 years, it's been getting drier and drier.
About 50% of the area burned in California in the last 30 years has been due to anthropogenic or human-caused climate change.
Crystal Colden, a former firefighter, is a professor at the University of California, Merced, specializing in wildfire behavior. What's the connection between climate change and wildfires here in California?
The scientific evidence is overwhelming. It dries the vegetation out so that it's more flammable. And then with climate change, rains are on average getting pushed back by several weeks in some cases. So now we see that where winter used to be far too wet for things to burn, now we can have long dry periods when the winds are starting to really pick up, and it means that fires can burn really intensely.
What do you think of President Trump's claim that the wildfires are the result of state mismanagement of the forests here in California?
Well, 55% of the state of California is federally managed, which means that it's actually under Trump's administration to manage those forests, not the state of California. But beyond that, most of the most destructive fires in the last decade, they're not in places that are forests. And we're seeing the same types of increases in fire intensity, in fire size, in this extension of fire season across the entire globe.
President Trump blaming California on a lack of preemptive raking.
But climate science isn't very convincing to President Trump, a point underscored by Democrats and their 2020 presidential candidate, Joe Biden.
You can't wait for us to take on what is happening to our climate. You can't wait.
A lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax.
Trump is also pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, in which 195 countries pledged to meet emissions reduction goals.
This agreement is less about the climate and more about other countries gaining a financial advantage over the United States.
He wants to free up fossil fuel companies. He wants to say, let it rip, regardless of the natural environment. The problem with that is nature strikes back. And nature strikes back in the form of fires, in the form of droughts, in the form of extreme weather events, plus diseases. And that's happening.
In 2018, the California legislature and Brown committed the state to 100% zero-carbon electricity and economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2045.
In our state, 35% of our electricity is renewable. And in America, wind energy is almost equal to coal now. So the future course is pretty clear. And Trump is engaged in a rearguard action against progress.
California has also been a leader in setting fuel efficiency standards for cars and promoting the use of electric vehicles. Autos are the greatest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the U.S.
We do more than any other state to try to clean our air. And the federal government for 50 years has said, we give you special dispensation under the law, under the Clean Air Act. We give you a waiver to go beyond what the federal government has done.
In 2012, the Obama administration adopted California's goal of achieving 54 miles a gallon by 2025 as the national standard. But the Trump administration reduced it to only 40 miles per gallon and revoked the waiver allowing California to set its own clean car standards.
No state has the authority to opt out of the nation's rules, and no state has the right to impose its policies on everybody else in our whole country.
California, joined by 14 other states, is challenging the Trump administration's rollbacks in court.
The Chinese are moving inexorably to zero-emission cars. If Trump were to succeed to be able to subsidize the old-fashioned gasoline car with the lowest possible regulation, we'll wake up in the next 5 to 7 years and the American industry will be in collapse. So we in California are trying to hold them back and to prevent it. But Trump doesn't understand all that complexity. So imposing a rule that said you have to have automobile efficiency that gets you 52 miles to the gallon, that is an interference with a sacred market. It's what you would call blasphemy if you were trying to see this in religious terms. And that's what it is. It's almost a religious war.
Trump's understanding of freedom and the threats California liberals pose to it resonates not only with supporters across the U.S., but some Californians themselves, especially in the northern rural part of the state. Members of the right-wing Tea Party movement and other conservatives here are trying to break away from California and set up the state of Jefferson, a new 51st state.
So now they want to outlaw diesel trucks and they want to outlaw cars that burn gasoline, and same with your gun rights.
And folks, he's right. I mean, how can another human being take that from you? And we'll talk about that on the other side of the break. So time is...
Radio host Terry Raposa and Win Carpenter are leaders in the effort to establish a new state. It is active in 23 counties and has thousands of supporters.
Well, each county has a committee. It's grassroots, and folks get together and they understand that they need to have their voices heard.
We are sovereign citizens tired of being under California rule.
State of Jefferson leaders are involved in a lawsuit demanding fair representation in the state legislature in Sacramento.
Los Angeles has 11 senators, and 11 counties in Northern California have 1. That's not liberty. That's not a balance of representation.
What is it about the policies that have been passed in Sacramento that make you want to have your own state?
Where do you start? The list is
Where do you start?
Yeah, the list is way too long. You're looking at taxation. You're looking at, I mean, just the restrictions on basic things to take care of yourself and to defend yourself.
What about the policies that have come out of Sacramento and the legislature that have to do with climate change?
The climate changes every season. We live in a 4-season part of the state.
Yeah.
It changes every season.
Every season, it does. We know it's going to be hot in June.
Yep.
Going to rain in December.
They see no connection between climate change and wildfires, pointing to regulations that prevent logging as the problem.
It all comes from restrictions in Sacramento. I come from a logging family, and my family logged for generations. And so you're out in the woods, you take care of it. If a fire strikes, due to lightning or something else happening, they can get to it and they know what to do.
Rural counties in Northern California, like those across the U.S., voted overwhelmingly for Trump in the 2016 election.
People understand the truth. They can spot a liar a mile away. Thank God we had Mr. Trump run for the presidency, and thank God he became the president, because he's exposed what we've been talking about for years in California.
Something he brought back is a thing called the Constitution, because you have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you have the right to freedom of religion, but that right is based upon a power called God.
God is actually taking us to a place to be more...
The culture war over religious values in America today plays a critical role in the battle between Trump and California progressives.
He raised us up together, and he made us sit together in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus.
Eric Johnson is the pastor at Bethel Church, an evangelical charismatic congregation in Redding. Earlier this year, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, large church gatherings were still permitted. If you look out 10 or 20 years, do you think there might be a state of Jefferson?
I wouldn't be surprised. I hope it doesn't happen. But I can see why people up here are very passionate about it. There's so many policies that are imposing a very different way of life. And not just a different way of life, but morals and values that we adhere to that are really a big deal.
So it's the social policies that bother people up here the most?
The gender value system that's being redefined in our day is being imposed on what most people say more traditional values. That one's really painful, because parents are losing the ability to determine their children's future on that conversation. And the kind of immorality that's being projected on our nation is just insanity to me. I mean, turn on a movie. The amount of sex scenes, the amount of endorsement behind sex has no ramifications.
With the kind of movies they're putting out, it's actually very dangerous for our country. What Hollywood is doing is a tremendous disservice.
President Trump's attacks on Hollywood cater to his evangelical base.
The movies, the entertainment industry, the technology is shaping the minds of every generation. And right now, it's very targeted at children.
But people in Hollywood are concerned about the messages President Trump is sending to children. In West Hollywood, the city council unanimously passed a resolution calling for the removal of Donald Trump's star from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Mayor Lindsay Horvath introduced the resolution.
It's time for this star to go. We as a city of West Hollywood have always stood for respect and inclusion of all people.
What was the argument that the resolution made for why the star should be removed?
Donald Trump has harassed and otherwise demeaned women throughout his career. He has targeted immigrants and LGBT people. He is a bully in chief. We do not need national monuments that glorify the kind of behavior that he's exhibited.
Donald Trump says that Hollywood is bad for America.
Hollywood tells some of the most important stories on big screens, changing culture and changing people's lives. Celebrities of Hollywood and use their platforms to advance causes for social justice, human rights, protecting the environment. So people can use Hollywood as a target, but Hollywood has the ability to do a lot of good and create a lot of change.
So far, the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce has refused to remove Trump's star, which is repeatedly vandalized.
We're tired of resources being spent on this. The crisis of homelessness has hit our region hard. We could be spending those dollars actually caring for people and uplifting people.
In fact, California voters have approved billions in new taxes and bonds to address homelessness. But President Trump continues to see the problem as a political opportunity. He actually claims that needles and feces from homeless encampments are flowing into the ocean, in violation of Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, regulations.
We just sent a violation to the city of San Francisco. Unsafe water, unsafe conditions, environmental, EPA, our EPA, which is doing a great job.
Yeah, so bizarre. So the feces doesn't run into the water, for one thing.
Jennifer Friedenbach is the executive director of the Coalition on Homelessness in San Francisco.
Demonizing homeless people to drive conservatives to the polls moves us backwards, because the more we demonize homeless people, the harder it is to get public support for investing in real solutions.
Other states have more homeless as a percentage of their population, but it is less visible because they have more shelters. Still, from 2017 to 2019, homelessness increased by 15% in California.
The thing that's happening is the increasing rents. So as folks who are extremely low income, that are living on the margins, as we see rents rise, we see increases in homelessness.
Conservatives say that California has a bad homeless problem because of its liberal culture and tolerance for drug use.
We have an opioid epidemic right now. We're seeing it everywhere in the country, right? It's not just in California. So I don't know about the tolerance thing, but about a third of the population have mental health or substance abuse challenges. Now the question is, did you have those issues and did those cause you to become homeless? Or were those issues exacerbated once you were on the streets? And in Trump's budget, he wants to severely cut back on the resources that our local government use to provide grants to help people stay in their homes.
California is putting a lot more effort into it, and I think they'll make some progress. But we got a problem here, taking into account mental illness and opioids and all sorts of things. So it's a breakdown in the modern capitalist system, and so far it's defied real effective solution.
Homelessness is just a particularly egregious example of a very liberal and very rich state throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at the problem, and the problem just gets worse.
Charles Kessler is the editor of the Claremont Review of Books, a leading conservative publication based in California. President Trump proposed a cut in the housing budget. Is he serious about addressing the problem, or is he just trying to score political points?
I think both are true. But it's part of his general reaction to the failure of blue state policies.
But homelessness has many different causes. It's complex, so it's going to require a lot of effort, and also, it's a structural problem in the economy that has to be solved, right? It's not necessarily a reflection of...
It's partly that, and you're right, of course, it has many causes, and so it won't have a single cure. But really, up until the 1980s, the state had a very robust middle class and a robust middle class economy. It doesn't really have that so much anymore.
The Democrats here have an idea of how to restore the California dream, right? You build a green economy, you invest in the economy of the future to deal with climate change.
Trump is, in his own way, calling attention to the failure of the blue state model green energy sounds great, but how many jobs is it actually going to produce, and how reliable is the energy going to be?
We are now the #1 energy producer in the world, and I'm not going to lose that wealth. I'm not going to lose it on dreams, on windmills, which frankly aren't working too well.
Because of our environmental strategies, California is significantly outperforming the United States of America in GDP growth over a 5-year period. 5 to 1, the number of clean energy jobs in the state of California versus fossil fuel jobs.
So President Trump is just simply dead wrong.
Daniel Kamen is at the forefront of the effort to build a green economy in California. His latest project is a neighborhood microgrid.
The idea of the Echo Block is that we're going to take 40 homes that will all have solar on the rooftop, and they're wired together to store the power into one central storage facility that is used to power each home and also to power electric vehicle charging stations.
So when the sun's not shining, how are these houses going to get their energy?
That's the beauty of the block here. They not only have rooftop solar, but they've invested in a community storage resource. And they're going to store their power there for hours to days and then bring it out as they need it.
So do you envision many Echo Blocks in the cities of the future?
That's exactly what we're looking at. And over the next 6 months, we hope to do the actual installation of all the hardware you see here.
Kamen founded the Renewable and Appropriate Energy Lab at the University of California, Berkeley, and shared a Nobel Prize in 2007. How far is California along the path of building a green economy in your view?
So California is very far along. And what's most exciting is that California has made the climate transition also a just transition, where we're investing in energy efficiency and solar for low-income neighborhoods across the state. California today generates around $10 billion a year in revenue from the cap and trade market, which it reinvests in communities, in research, and in companies that are involved in the transition. And across the United States right now, 35 to 40% of all investments in green tech flow through California.
Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden is following California's lead and promises to transition America to a green economy.
By 2050, the United States will be 100% clean energy economy.
The 2020 election in the United States is absolutely critical, and it's critical because we know on the climate side that we have very few years left to get on an innovative green energy path.
Do you think it's critical that Donald Trump win the next election?
Absolutely.
I think he will win. In fact, I think he's going to get very close in California. His percentage will be higher than last time.
Absolutely. Mr. Trump is at one point of the government, and then we are at the other end. He's fighting from that side, we're fighting from this side.
Sometimes, in order to unite, you have to divide. And this is true of all great presidents. I mean, look at FDR. In order to unify the country behind the New Deal, he had to demonize the Republicans.
So you believe that Trump accusing the Democrats of being traitors, of being socialists, is actually a strategy to unite America?
Yes, I mean, it's an attempt, even as FDR tried to do, to cast your opponents into the political darkness, outer darkness, but in order to define a new middle of the road for American politics going forward.
Because of his ideas, Trump is a very dangerous personality. And I'd almost say he's leading a demolition derby to the detriment of everybody, including himself.
What do you think the stakes are in the 2020 presidential election?
Well, I think the big stake is climate change and also social turmoil. The Democratic way of governing is under great assault, and that's because the problems are difficult. They're unprecedented, and America is reflecting that general turmoil. But we have the means to overcome it.
What do you think is going to bring America together again?
We've got to find a way to see the common threats. Certainly, the coronavirus is a common threat. Climate change is a common threat. The spread of nuclear technology is a common threat. And so we need a philosophy that's totally against the chauvinistic, nationalistic, we're the best perspective on the world. We are interdependent with our neighbors, with our fellow Americans, and with the rest of the people on the planet.